what else am I supposed to say? Oh, I'm going to hand over to Mark, and Mark's going to invite the participants, the people taking part in the chat at the kitchen table, to each tell a little story. They'll have a few minutes each, and then they're going to talk together about some of the issues raised. We don't have a facility for translating the chat into Welsh, and we're really sorry about that. We've done our best, but we just can't connect up with a Welsh translation for today. But we will monitor that chat, and after about 45 minutes, we're going to funnel some of the main issues or comments from the chat to Mark and the panel for any further comment. So that's the way we're going to go. So I'm really glad everyone's here, and we're quite excited, but also very relaxed. So I'll hand over to Mark now.
Thank you, Leslie. Lovely introduction and great chair for the meeting. And if any of us go over time or prattle on too much, I'm sure you and John will be very strict on the timings. Lovely to see everyone, and a big thank you to Maggie's Cardiff for allowing us to come around into their kitchen and the kitchen table. A few people have requested that I won't do that to people. I'll just leave that here. Thank you very much for hosting this. As you can see, we're in the kitchen here in Maggie's in Cardiff. I'm going to give you a little tour of the kitchen, a bit like Location, the TV program. You can see Michelle over my left shoulder there, and there's Joe over there sitting at the kitchen table, and I'm just basically sort of by the hob, if you like, and behind me is the coffee making facilities. So this morning I've already been very busy and making coffee for Joe and for Michelle over there, basically. But yes, as I said, happy International Nurses Day today, and Michelle brought in these cakes. So if there's noise from me, please put me on mute when I'm chewing the cake. So it's Dying Matters Awareness Week, really big event in the sort of general medical, nursing, palliative care, patient sort of diary in a sense, really, because a lot of the big topics that we discuss and sometimes want more discussion about happen more intensely during this week. If it were up to me, it'd be Advanced Care Planning and Dying Matters Week every day of the year, but perhaps that would be a little bit too much. But yeah, so thank you for letting us host this event during Dying Matters Week here in Cardiff, with lots of people joining from all over the United Kingdom as well. Big thank you to Rachel and Sam, who've been really helping us with the technical aspects here around the kitchen table. And yeah, so brief introductions from me. So Mark Taubert is my name. I'm a consultant in palliative medicine. I work just next door to here in Velindre Cancer Center. So it was only just a few steps for me to come over from my clinical work. And I shall be hot legging it back over there at about 1 o'clock again. And then we've also got Joe here today with us, Joe Solden, who's a clinical psychologist who works here at Maggie's. We've got Leslie, who's chairing the meeting today, who you've met earlier. Thank you for introducing the session, and she'll be coming back in a short while for Compassionate Cymru. And I'm really pleased we've got Chris here today, Chris Poynton. Chris, we haven't seen each other since I last checked. We last saw each other in 2017, I think, also here in Cardiff when we talked together. So Chris is joining us today. You may remember Chris from the Hello, My Name Is campaign, and I'm sure all of you remember the absolutely fantastic Dr. Kate Granger, and he'll be talking a little bit about that today. Michelle Pengelly joins us here in the kitchen as well. She's sitting over there from me. We've got Sarah Wheeler joining us from POIS. We've got John Moss as well, who's keeping an eye on things, keeping an eye on the chat, and telling us if there's anything comes up in the chat. Joe, I wondered if I could start with you. Do you want to just give a brief introduction? put you on the spot there. I'm very sorry.
No, that's fine. I didn't know I was going first. I've unmuted, so I'm successful. Hi, I'm Jo. I'm the clinical psychologist at Maggie's at Mark, as Mark introduced. And I haven't got a story as much as a reflection when I was thinking about our title today of A Good Place to Die, and reflecting on my career up to date, much of which has been in intensive care and supporting people through death and dying, sometimes in intensive care, and realised that I did have an attachment to place, the way in which we would in ITU make the room as home-like and as personal as possible for end-of-life care. And also I worked in New Zealand for a while, and being involved in a project there that was looking at the huge barriers involved in getting some patients from ITU, even on ventilators, home to die, because they particularly wanted that. In the Maori culture, your connection with place is very, very strong. And now I work in Maggie's, and a core part of Maggie's is the place, the environment that Mark's given you a quick scoot around. But the reason that Maggie wanted these places is to provide places where people can feel cared for, where they can connect with one another. And so I realized in my history, I do have a strong attachment to place and good places to do things, whether that be to die or to address things psychologically. But the pandemic has really challenged that for me hugely. And I would have to say that we have managed to provide what Maggie's vision of a place where people can feel cared for, where they can connect with one another, actually on Zoom or Teams, you know, and places which I would never have imagined it was possible to make that psychological space. So I've been really challenged on that, and I have to hear lots of feedback from the visitors that actually they can do that on Zoom. So it has really challenged that for me. And the other reflection I wanted to make on place was about this psychological space, not just geographical space. And it's really affirmed to me that it's not always geographical, the pandemic has, but also that our culture, every week in Maggie's, we're seeing people who are in that important end of life, that important phase of their lives. And I'm struck repeatedly by how the culture does not support them with a psychological space to talk about it or to address it, in that many people around them avoid it. And so our challenge to try and create that psychological space where they can talk about that and work with that. And I suppose I get quite distraught at times that it's not fair, that it's the people that are in that end of life phase that are ones that are having to battle with the culture. So this kind of discussion I find really important, and any ways that we can, it's our responsibility as a culture to be able to provide that safe space, that psychological space where people are able to talk about it and approach it, because so many of our visitors feel not able to talk about it with those around them, not able to bring it up. And I suppose that gets me to reflect on not just physical space, but psychological space.
Thanks, Jo. I mean, the hashtag for this Dying Matters Awareness Week is in a good place. And I think that got us all thinking, you know, here in Wales locally and different places. And that is one of the reasons why kind of Maggie seemed like a really good choice to kind of have the center of this conversation in a sort of now hyper-connected video Zoom world. And of course, for Maggie's, the location and the setting and the surroundings is something that is, well, it's kind of one of the, is it the raison d'etre? I don't know, but it's such a beautiful place here. I feel so tranquil and relaxed in here. But just looking outside the window there, you can see this, it's so brilliantly designed that you just look outside and see the trees, when actually we're in quite an urban setting here. Would you say that is one of the big selling points?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is core of what we do. But I guess that has been really challenged in the pandemic, because we've wanted to try and create that same feeling that the architects have given us in the building, but on Zoom. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I'll go around a bit. I was maybe going to go to Chris now, actually. Hello, Chris. If you wanted to just introduce yourself, and I think you're in the north of England somewhere, is that right?
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Hello, my name is Chris Poynton, widower of the late Dr. Kate Granger, as Mark mentioned. And it's my pleasure to be on the Zoom today and to talk and share some experiences that Kate and I had, obviously, you know, in Kate's journey before she died. I am up in West Yorkshire, so in Leeds, and it's a place that, you know, is where Kate and I sort of lived and where Kate died as well, back in 2016. But yeah, more than happy to be on today and to share stories and hopefully provide some inspiration as well.
Thank you, Chris, and great to chat to you again as well. Sarah, shall we move to Powys? And I hope I'm pronouncing that in a really Welsh way. Is that right, Powys? Yeah, is that good?
Well, I've got a Brummie accent, so don't ask me.
Oh, okay, fine.
No,
Lots
Powys.
of different accents today. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm Sarah Wheeler. I'm lead nurse for end-of-life care planning in Powys Teaching Health Board. Do you want me to carry on? Just reflection, Mark?
Yeah.
I suppose within my role as a community palliative care nurse specialist, you alluded to that environment. So the sort of stunning beauty of the nature in rural Powys has often influenced preferences for many patients and families I meet. I can recall one such lady. She had the doors open on a farm to take in the scenery and the smell of the fresh summer breeze. This is what she wanted, and that fragrance from the fields that she farmed. And she was surrounded by her loved ones when she died, and she achieved her good death and what mattered most to her, which was that spiritual place. You know, that was integral to her best place. And that was backed up by a huge network of professionals and her rural community who supported her good place to die. I know that there are those whose sole focus at end of life is to live until a significant celebration. So it isn't about place, but it's about something that's meaningful and matters to them. So a significant celebration or a precious child. So I often think of those people I've been privileged to meet, really, and they often live after that important event and die soon after. So you know that's what was important to them, not the place. We've had lots of experience of people dying alone, and they want to be alone because that's the way they've lived their life, and die in that peaceful and comfortable environment. Or we've had sort of really, I can recall recently someone living in challenging environments who was determined to fight each day. That was his place, to fight, really, and sort of only accepted admission within a crisis for his end of life. So that fight was important to him. And I just recall there was one lady very much some years ago, and the most important thing for her was the care of her pets at end of life, and it caused her so much distress and anxiety. So I set about with her to conduct interviews for prospective adoptees, to ensure that she found the right person to care for her adored cats following her death. And that was what was important. It wasn't about place; it was about those meaningful aspects of her life that were important to her. So I suppose as a compassionate Cymru, we just need to focus on the right emotional well-being space and not just the physical place, and be ready to deliver that best end of life experience for all our individuals, really. So, but I've got endless stories.
Good. We will tap into those a bit later.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, Sarah. That's very nice. And before we get all controversial, I thought we'd talk to Michelle next, and she'll introduce herself and her role.
Nothing controversial for me, Mark. So my name is Michelle Pengelly. I'm the specialist nurse for supportive care at Velindre Cancer Centre in Cardiff. And I think I'm in a really privileged position. I've been a cancer nurse for 34 years, and that's enabled me to care for patients and their families in a hospice, in the cancer centre, and actually in the community. And I've reflected a lot on the deaths in the hospital, deaths in the community, deaths at home, and obviously it's the people and the families that can make that good death. And I've seen the most beautiful deaths in all three places. And some of the ones that stand out for me, I remember in the community, an elderly lady whose passion was music, and all her grandchildren came. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was in the days when we were actually allowed to go out in the middle of the night on our own. And they sat around her bed and they sang her favourite songs. And, you know, this has got to be, it must be 30 years ago, and it still catches me to this day, that image of them just sat around singing her favourite songs. And it was a beautiful, beautiful moment. And of course it was sad, and of course it was poignant. But it, you know, those things really stand out. And I think about the deaths in the hospital, and you know how hard we work actually to make that the right location and a good death. And it was very challenging last year, you know, with PPE and restrictions. But I think people are so important. We talk about this beautiful Maggie Centre. For me, it's the people who run this Maggie Centre that make the place. They make this place really important. And I think as staff in the hospital, it's really, really important that we remember the impact that we can have as well on someone's experience of death. People remember little things, and they will recount those things years later. So I can remember one lady who actually asked me, could she speak to me privately? She was the patient, she was dying. And she said there was something that was really important to her, and I did not know what was coming. And she said that she didn't want to die with whiskers on her chin. And actually her family didn't know that she had a little shave and a little pluck. It was like, can you make sure that when I die that doesn't happen? And I thought, wow, that was so important to her, and perhaps something that we might have missed. But you know, it isn't always the massive things, is it? You know, it's little things that can make a massive difference. And it's about dignity as well, and looking at that person and what it is that they need and what the family need. And we had one gentleman as well whose wife was dying, a young couple. And one of the things that was really important to him is he wanted to see where her body went after she died, and asked me to actually walk with him the route that she would take from the ward to the hospital mortuary. And he said that she had had such beautiful, dignified care, but he wanted that to continue after death, and it was really important. I'd never been asked that, and I walked with him, and I saw it in a completely different way by walking those steps with him. And he actually said he couldn't have that. He didn't want to go in on that route. We had to work on then a different way of getting the funeral directors to come to the ward to collect it, because for him that was something that he just didn't want to happen. And so sometimes I think we're challenged to think outside the box, but we should do what we can. So I just think I'm really privileged to have been able to experience some of these things.
Thank you, Michelle. And yeah, I hope we can have lots more stories like that. And I know you've got lots of very rich stories like that that you can share. It's interesting with these meetings because it's still a relatively new thing, having these Zoom meetings and seeing lots of people. So I've been able to actually watch the people on the call and some of the listeners, and see how they're reacting as well. So, and one of the first things that happened when you came on, Michelle, was people went closer to the screen and kind of listened. But I think the volume has gone up again. So I think your microphone somehow while you were talking got a little bit closer. So. But yeah, it's interesting how you can gauge the audience even in this online forum a little bit when we're so removed location-wise. But yeah, I mean, what struck me from those introductions was that location is not just about preferred place of death, And I just wanted to share something with you, which I'm allowed to share because it was a healthcare practitioner, patient of mine who I see in my clinic, who sort of made a flippant remark and just said, all you guys tend to always ask me, and that's why I've got my standard answer ready, is about DNR and PPD. By DNR, he meant do not resuscitate decisions, and PPD, he meant preferred place of death. And I was really taken aback by that. But immediately I understood what he meant, because he has an advanced cancer, and whenever he gets admitted anywhere, be that for a blood transfusion or be that for intravenous antibiotics, it's always on the healthcare professionals' minds, and it's something that is I feel a bit ashamed about, actually. And that's why the title of this talk today is a little bit more controversial than some of the other titles during Dying Matters Awareness Week. Perhaps that's why we've got quite a high attendance as well, because people wanted to see the feathers fly during this meeting and have some good debate. But is it true? Are we in healthcare? Are we in society now? Have we become obsessed with these two topics? And actually, the reality is that patients, if you ask them in a big survey in town somewhere, where would you like to die? Oh, yes, of course, at home. They put that as the first answer. But if you contextualize it and say, well, yes, if you were at home and you broke your hand, and you've got cancer and lots of other problems, but you broke your hand, would you still be happy to go into hospital? And then the situation changes. Equally, people make situation and context-specific decisions quite often. So just saying that society as a whole, everyone wants to die at home, maybe suits some policymakers, but actually the reality is very different, and we should stop obsessing about preferred place of death and make it a very peripheral part of a much broader conversation about what matters most to people. And I'm going to just bring Leslie in here. I know, Leslie, you briefed me that you didn't want to come in too often as the chair of the meeting, but I'm just going to throw you right in there, throw you right in the kitchen on that controversial one.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mark. Very often people do get caught up with the romantic kind of idea of being at home, but home isn't always the most romantic place to die. And I think we need to think much more about how where you actually are can meet your needs, can make you feel safe, can give you peace, where you can deal with the emotional need to put things to rest for yourself. I know one of my difficult experiences was with one of my PhD students who was dying, and she particularly wanted to tell me that she'd fabricated a part of her thesis, and she'd asked me to go and see her, and I went to see her, and she was still able to speak to me, and she said she felt she had to unburden herself of this particular aspect of her work, because she'd worked very hard, but she'd fabricated part of a chapter of her thesis. And I was grateful, really, that I was able to say to her, that doesn't matter. I'm sure lots of people actually invent parts of their theses. Obviously, we don't want them to, and we try not to, but it really wasn't important in the scale of things. And it gave her enormous peace of mind. And I was really grateful for that opportunity to do that. So, and that's not to do with the physical location. That's to do with having the access to someone who go wherever you are and work with you to understand what your journey's about and what's important to you. So I agree. It's not about the place. It's about us working together, all of us as people, to support each other in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
Can I just come in there?
Yes, please.
I'm just aware of sort of an outsider looking into a situation where if somebody chooses not to have sort of conventional palliative medicine or treatment, or they want to stay in pain, and I've experienced healthcare professionals actually questioning their capacity and validity, even though they've got capacity, because they're not they're not doing the norm. You know, they're not taking our advice. They're on their individual journey. And having to justify their decision all the time, not, you know, as to why they don't want that treatment, or why they've made the decision, you know, not to go with the norm, really. And I think that's really sad. I think it's really sad that you know they've constantly had to justify their decisions when they really value those decisions, and that's the way they've lived their life. Especially, you know, down the alternative route, it causes a lot of angst with a lot of healthcare professionals, because, you know, we want to achieve what we see as our quality of life for our patients and families, really. So I don't know whether anyone has experienced that.
Yeah, I think, you know, this specific patient, I don't think he had a big issue with it, but he was so used to giving the usual spiel to all the healthcare professionals that, you know, he was quite au fait with it. And but I still felt a little bit of a sense of shame that we're not more interconnected, so we already know, in a sense, what the wishes, preferences, and thoughts are, and B, that the main focus, the headline news on advanced care planning, is always preferred place of death and DNR or DNACPR. So yeah, I'd like to invite Chris to maybe help me with that sense of shame that I felt, and see if Kate or Chris have had any strong opinions on that one, because I know Kate always had very strong opinions on things.
Yeah, and like you said there, you know, Kate was very had very strong opinions on a lot of things, especially towards the end of her life. But even, you know, from the very start, so she was diagnosed in 2011, so 10 years ago this year, she was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and, you know, at that point she was only 29 years old, and, you know, she died in 2016 following the 5-year journey with cancer. Don't get me wrong, we had some, you know, amazing times throughout that journey, but all the way along that journey that we went through together, Kate was very keen on making sure that her plan was instigated as she wanted it to be. So she knew where she wanted to die. She knew what she wanted to do before that point. So she had a quite extensive, as I'm sure you'll remember, Mark, quite an extensive bucket list that she wanted to have ticked off. And that included very small things, such as, you know, going to the East Coast to have her favourite food. But then it also had other things like seeing certain bands in concert. But the main thing around this is that making sure everyone was aware of her desire to be in the place that she wanted to be in at the end of her life, surrounded by the people that she wanted to be surrounded by, and that happened. You know, as far as deaths go, you know, Kate had, you know, a really, really good death, because, as we've mentioned, it happens to us all, and for us to be able to facilitate that in the way that the person wants it to be is the main thing. And like I said, you know, I'll always be eternally grateful to the people that Kate was looked after by in the NHS, and also at the hospice where she eventually died.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Can I just put a quick reflection on that? I'm kind of struck by Chris and Sarah's stories and your awkwardness or your concern, Mark, about and it's interesting that healthcare professionals fed it back to us, that you're always asking this way, and Kate helped it open up to hello, my name is, and the patient's agenda. And it's interesting that we filter our questions with patients, don't we, around our agenda and what we think is going to be top of their list. So it's PPD and things like that. But actually, what would it be like if we ask people what matters to you right now? Then things like Kate's wishes, or that patient who wants alternative treatment wishes, their agenda would be first rather than ours. And I know that's quite a challenging thought, because it's quite an open question. But I think it can be interesting to reflect on what would it be like if that was my first question, rather than our agenda questions.
Yeah, and I think just coming back on that, and I know there's a huge campaign as well around what matters to you, which is obviously been going for quite a while now. But certainly, because of Kate's background and because she did work in the in the healthcare sector and as a doctor, I think she sort of opened up quite rapidly around what was important to her without having to be asked for that. But there's a lot of people in society that probably wouldn't have that confidence to say, actually, this is what I want, irrespective of what the healthcare professional will be saying to that individual. But for Kate, she was very forward with her thoughts. But like you said, it is something that the Hello, My Name Is campaign does start that conversation as a human interaction.
And just to expand on that, for anyone who doesn't know, the Hello, My Name Is campaign started with Kate really noticing that doctors and nurses would just plonk themselves onto her bedside basically and start talking, and without any introduction, saying what was happening next in the healthcare situation. And it's just such an unacceptable thing to do, just to suddenly arrive in someone's surroundings and not even introduce yourself or have the manners to sort of say hello. And so the concept of Hello, My Name Is came up, and the hashtag, and we're still wearing the badges, and it's still very much part of my teaching for medical students as well. I have medical students in every Tuesday. The first thing I say to them is introduce yourself to the person, and maybe let them ask a few questions of you as well, sort of make a context, say that you're a third-year medical student, etc. And we shouldn't have to say that, in a sense. It should be general societal etiquette that you do that. But I think Kate really successfully managed to drive that home, and maybe also managed to improve some other behaviors that happen around the bedside from healthcare professionals. So I'm being fairly self-critical here, but yeah.
Yeah, and it actually started with an interaction with a porter. So it was a porter that was coming to take Kate down to theatre, and it was him that introduced himself as Brian. And obviously that's where the idea came from. And obviously that was 2013, and we're now in obviously 2021, 8 years on, and it's still going strong. The campaign reached over 20 countries, and I know that on the call today we've got people from all over the world. I know there's people on from Australia, for example, and I know that it touches so many people, and the legacy will continue. It's 5 years since Kate died this year, but that legacy will be with us far beyond our lifetimes as well.
Yeah. And if it's possible, I've had just a direct message in the chat just now asking for some literature and information on the Hello, My Name Is campaign. So if Sam or Rachel in the background could do the Google search and then place the link into the chat, that would be lovely as well. Thank you, Chris. That's really valuable. I mean, are there any other opinions? So it is of course something that is important, that we talk about location and where people want to be, and I'm not saying it isn't important, but should we, rather than from starting point of going in and talking about preferences right at the end of life and location, etc., should we be turning it around? Is it possible? Are community district nurses, GPs, community CNSs in palliative care even able to have long sweeping conversations about what people fear or what people want to do? And you'd think that would be an absolute fundamental. I have a patient who didn't care about location. He said hospital is fine, hospice is fine, home is okay, but I want a male carer, and that's my main fear, basically. And I suppose what I'm saying is, if you ask too many closed questions that fit your healthcare agenda, we're not going to get very far, are we? Because people are also different. Michelle, did you want to come in on that one?
Can I check if you can hear me okay? Yeah. I guess one of the things I wanted to bring up along the similar lines with that is this concept of compassionate visiting. I know we heard a lot of it in the pandemic, But it is challenging, and before COVID hit, our hospital did have visiting time. So we had a visiting time that was 2 till 5 and then 6 till 8. And the reason we had visiting times was actually it came from a couple of surveys from our patients who said, we don't like open visiting, it exhausts us. We can't have a wash in the morning without someone's visitors behind the screen. And so we brought in those visiting times. And I remember speaking to the son of one of our patients who was dying, and in the last days of life, there's open visiting, patients' relatives stay. Obviously, there were some restrictions in COVID, but they still were able to spend time. They stay overnight, our incredible staff feed them, the relatives, and really care for them. But this gentleman's perspective was slightly different. And he said to me, why is it in the last days of my dad's life, when he wasn't able to fully engage with us, that we were given this gift of open visiting? It was actually last week and the week before when we were laughing and joking, and he wanted to tell us about policies and things he wanted, that we really, really needed more than a few hours of visiting. But I understand why the hospital has these visiting times. And it is such a challenge to do the right thing, isn't it, for people? And there is no easy answer to it. And I think, you know, Mark, we came across this quite a few times last year, but actually it's been here a lot longer. The challenges of this giving open visiting in the last days of life, when actually it's that time before that can be even more precious.
Yes, that's right. And it just made me think, because Michelle, we're seeing a few people jointly at the moment as well. Is that is not just about the physical location. It's about what people want to get done as well. We have a client together at the moment, and he's got this big project that he wants to finish, and that's really important to him. Where he does it, he doesn't care, as long as he's got a laptop and he can use his email and get in touch with publishers and various others as well. And it's the not necessarily seeing things as being the last weeks or months of life, but it's months of life and living, basically. We're not thinking just focusing on dying, but this is a busy man, and he's got a job and he wants to do something, and he's got projects to do. And the last thing he wants to talk about is every healthcare professional or social worker or person who's trying to help him coming in with the same agenda. He's got a different agenda, and how do we create the forum for him to be listened to in that? Just very quickly, the chat is moving by very quickly, but I picked up on something earlier about DNR and DNACPR decisions. So Julia, very sorry to hear your experience, that it was brought up 17 times. And I'm probably the last person to speak, because I'm in charge of Orwell's DNACPR policy for my sins. So I kind of host regular meetings, and we've got a forum and a policy with patient engagement as well. And of course, this is always a concern when this topic of conversation comes up time and time again with patients in their healthcare. This sort of focus from the healthcare community to talk about it. And my view on it has always been that we need far better communication skills training. We need better training in bringing up these conversations, not avoid them completely, because they are important, but not 17 times. We can hold these conversations maybe 2 or 3 times with healthcare professionals who are very closely involved, but just a few times, and bring them up very openly, and even ask a question like, I'm going to talk about something that some people find a bit difficult to talk about, but I'm going to mention it anyway, and you can stop me at any point. And if you don't want to talk about it, we'll leave it. But just offering that conversation, and you often find that people do want to talk about it, not always with their relatives present, I may hasten to add, or not in the knowledge of their relatives, because it's sometimes easier to talk to me or someone else as a stranger in this sort of forum. But we're constant messages on repeat, shift patterns, new people coming on, out of our staff, and everyone's got the same agenda, and not everyone brings it across that well. So yeah, Sarah, I don't know if you've had any sort of experiences, good or bad, that could bring in on that conversation.
So I think just going back to Joe and what Chris said about what's important to people and the listening, and we're in a very privileged position. I'm sure Michelle will say that we have time to listen actually, and pull out what is that's important when we first meet patients and families as far as referral for palliative and end of life care. So our community is really important. So we talk about you've talked about hospitals. We don't have hospitals. We don't have a hospital in Powys. Our hospitals are our community hospitals, which are more like an extension to home for our patients and families, really. And the people that work there, they know them well. So it's almost like a big extension of that, really. But what we do is that because we have challenges in the community that I live in, it's very rural. We have to travel a long way for care. So our community is so important, and that network really. So that there is this sort of culture that people want to support each other, and there's good sort of deaf literacy within our community, really. We've done projects to sort of empower people, empower healthcare, social care, voluntary organisation to talk about future care planning, advanced care planning. Those conversations about DNACPR can be very uncomfortable, especially, like you said, if they're brought up routinely in a hospital environment. But we try and have those conversations at an early stage, really, especially for our palliative patients, because it's something that we know will be routinely talked about, really, in that hospital environment. But within Powys, again, we haven't got a hospice. We have amazing voluntary sort of organisations that support well-being. So we have to plan quite early for an inevitable death, and coordinate those plans. So the most important thing is listening and understanding what our patients and families want, what their expectations are, and at the same time telling them what we can achieve within the community, in a rural community where we don't necessarily have the same facilities, and we don't have the manpower. So it's a real shared decision-making process that we go through in as far as working together. And also we've got a good farming community, so that circle of life is so important. They understand nature and circle of life, and they want to support their locals, their loved ones, and the people that they've grown up and spent their lives with, really. So I see myself very lucky in that respect, because we've got an engaged community. We developed an advanced care plan called My Life, My Wishes in Powys, and that's just given an impetus to having those honest and meaningful and sometimes difficult conversations, and it's happening in the community without healthcare input, really. So
Sarah,
that's been really important.
Sarah, just to put you on the spot there, because I'm kind of monitoring the chat as well as we're going along, and there's loads of interesting stuff coming up in the chat. But does your advanced care plan cater for food and for sex as well? Because of course these are important topics. I put you on the spot there, didn't I?
Just unmuting. It's what it does cater for is what's important to me. So it's a person held document. it is about what's important to me, what I do want, what I don't want. It obviously leads into more formalised aspects of advanced care planning, but it is about the person. We want them to think about what's important to them, what their understanding is, what they don't want. Think about their funerals, think about their digital legacy, financial legacy. So as far as sex is concerned, well, if that's what they want to put in their person held documents and that's important to them, then absolutely. But it isn't just about the document, is it, Mark? It's about the conversation as well. So it's about sharing, what your wishes or your preferences or what's important to you.
Absolutely correct. And, I often say that also about DNACPR forms and ADRD forms. It's not about the document, it's about the conversations that come around it. Eleni, you sent me a direct message in the chat. Please do harmony in living, harmony in dying is a really important one. So please post it publicly for everyone to see. Eleni's been doing a lot of work with food and nutrition in palliative care settings as well. We're talking about life, aren't we, at the moment? We're talking about good food, good sex, good wine, all these different things. A patient surprised me recently when the main gist of the consult was about sexual activity. And I hadn't expected that, maybe my preconceptions, but one of the medications I had started him on for pain had caused problems. And I'd never even bothered to counsel him about it in advance. So yeah, you can start off with location and DNR, but really the patient agenda is going to be about something else. And I know Michelle wants to come in here.
Yeah, it was just to say, Mark, you alluded a little bit about the documentation and training, communication training. And I think one of the words that's really important is genuineness. So when we as professionals are with patients and families, that we do that with compassion, but also genuineness. It's not a tick box exercise, which it can be when you have these documents that guide you to do a certain task, if you like. It can become a tick box exercise if you don't do it with genuineness and compassion. And I think patients and families see through that. And that's where, conversations like this are so important. I think that we share good practice, as Sarah has mentioned, some of the amazing stuff in Powys. That we learn to be comfortable talking about these things so that we can get better at it.
And Michelle, it's International Nurses Day today, but has the nursing profession become too protocol driven? Has it become too tick box driven?
So here comes the controversy then, Mark.
Doctors, of course, wouldn't fit in that criteria, no way.
Yeah, no comment on that. Yeah, I think all professions have. I mean, there's such, we've got some amazing staff, haven't we, in the cancer centre here, but there's such a pressure these days on the amount of paperwork that's there, and those things have to be done for safety reasons. I get that, and I think we can do both. But I think people worry about some of these conversations, and they worry about doing harm to people where actually the harm is not doing it, isn't it? And I think we need to support, particularly junior staff, to be comfortable. As it's an International Nurses Day, we are so comfortable asking you about your poo. What shape is it? What does it smell like? What does it look like? But we're less comfortable about asking you about your wishes for dying. So it's for me, it's about supporting staff and empowering staff to do the right thing and to be genuine and compassionate. And I think most people are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually, Michelle, that all the healthcare professionals so want to do the right thing and are really keen to do the right thing. But it is a frightening conversation to bring up, isn't it? And if there's a form or an acronym that you can use, that protects you a little bit. Yeah. I love the title of Sarah's My Life, My Wishes, because it's not an acronym. It says what it is, and it is that, and it will facilitate a healthcare professional who's desperate to do the right thing, being able to open that question up. It's easy to put a distance in those conversations, and it's finding ways of not putting that distance, but the staff being supported to do that. That's not easy, but
I think I'm aware of time, and I think Leslie probably is a very strict time keeper.
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on some of the issues that people have raised in the chat bar there. One that struck me particularly is the similarity between birth plans and death plans, where you absolutely have to be willing to be flexible. And I think there are so many similarities. I think that Joe mentioned it yesterday briefly when we were chatting about we make our birth plans with healthcare professionals. We have these things that we really want to have my baby at home, but things happen along the way. So we have to be flexible. We have to understand what resources are in place and what sacrifices we might be making for other people as well as ourselves, what challenges we may present for them, I think. So I really like that similarity between birth plans and death plans. Does that resonate with the rest of you, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Chris, did you want to come in on that one?
Yes, I think as well the flexibility of it is something that is key, because I know that, you know, Kate's first wishes, you know, 2 or 3 years into knowing, you know, she was going to die in the next few years was to be at home. But then as time went on, we sort of realized that what would be best, well, she realized that what would be best for her and for her close family and friends would be to be in a local hospice. And it's a hospice that, you know, we knew well. Kate had done 2 talks there in the previous few years, and so it has to be flexible and change with circumstances. And like I said before, you know, it was almost a perfect death.
You know, Chris, when you came in right at the start and when you were talking about Kate, I don't know if Joe and Michelle noticed this, because the window is open here. There was a really loud and beautiful blackbird singing in the garden. Michelle's nodding her head, and I think if you listen to the video again, you might hear it through our microphones. And I just thought, there's Kate interrupting what Chris is saying. She's keeping him straight, you know.
Yeah, she always used to do that. But yeah, it was a great partnership.
Yeah, Leslie.
Yeah. So one of the other issues that's been raised in the chat bar is that people definitely have things about what they don't want to happen. They have absolutely clear things about what they just at all costs want to avoid. And I do think that when we have those conversations with people, and we ought to have them long before we're going to die, you know, we need to be chatting about them with our children, grandchildren. We really want to try and make it much more acceptable. But those things about what we definitely don't want, I think perhaps people could be recording those more definitely. So if you really don't want your neighbour who you haven't spoken to for 25 years coming anywhere near, then I think we should respect that.
How do you know? How do you know that, Leslie? That's in my plan. Hope he's not watching. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? It's that kind of the do's and don'ts and the wants, and you know the birth plan or the death plan or the living plan in a sense.
Yeah.
And how you document it. I mean, if you put it on a scrap of paper, you know, for others to read, that's fine as well. But I think some documents are particularly nice to use and user friendly. And Eleni Tsiyompanu from London has asked Sarah if she could make the My Life, My Wishes document available to read, and I'm sure we can put the link into the sidebar as well. But it's really about what some managers called the wraparound processes around these things. So forget about the forms. You can have a terribly designed form, but if you've got a beautiful communicator who and a wonderful, you know, dialogue, that's all. That's one of the main things that matters really.
Yeah, and supporters who will support your journey in the way that you want it to be, I think.
I've noticed in the chat area that Val Alexander has unmuted herself, and I just wondered if she no, did you want to come in, Val? Or
oh, I haven't unmuted myself. I must have been like that all the time.
oh, okay, that's right. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, anything else from the chat, Leslie, that that we should be talking about?
I've got something, Mark, if that's okay. One of the comments earlier on was, how do you engage with patients who shut down when you try to talk about their end-of-life preferences?
I can answer that one, but equally, I'm happy for someone else to answer that. Sarah, what would your approach be?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute then. I think maybe that's part of respecting what that person doesn't want to talk about, and I think you know, we've talked about being open and honest and having those important conversations, but not everybody wants to, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, and I think you can't force somebody to talk about their wishes if they're uncomfortable to do that. So in that sense, you know, in my practice, we often as a team, if we're being blocked to think about, you know, what that person wants, we will talk about maybe we responded to a crisis really, as a team really. So it's about that team discussion, but all the time, like you said, Mark, you gently lead in some conversation or listening for cues, and sometimes those cues tell you much more, or a verbal expression will tell you much more than actually trying to tease out information if they're not willing to talk. So yeah,
I got into trouble a few years ago, actually, in Velindre on one of the ward rounds, Sarah, just on that, because with using purely silence. So I had this lady, and she said, she talked. There's one topic I don't want to talk about, and I bet you're going to bring it up. And then she talked about it, and I didn't say anything. And then she talked about it for, I'd say, about a good 2 minutes or so, about the topic that she didn't want to talk about. But she talked about why she didn't want to talk about it and why I might bring it up, basically. And then she said, you did that on purpose. You stayed silent on purpose. And now I've actually talked about it, and now I actually feel better about it as well. So it's interesting. Of course, little cues, and actually clinicians who are very open to sort of cues and sort of limiting things within the conversation. I think that's a really important aspect, to sort of say, and actually give people the space as well, and sort of say, look, we can stop there. I'm going to stop there. I build in optional breaks for people so that they can opt out, and then they've got the choice and they feel in control then. I don't know, Joe, if you feel that's a good way of doing it from the psychology perspective.
I think definitely taking their lead, isn't it? And just feeling your way with their where they're going with it. Absolutely. I'm just gonna
It's getting very raucous in this kitchen now, as you can hear in the background, maybe.
I
yeah.
think it's because we're just, oops, yes, and Joe's disappeared. We're just coming up to 1 o'clock, I'm afraid. So I'm just going to thank everyone for a really interesting conversation. And I'm sorry we can't carry on, but I suspect that the internet's going to put the brakes on. But thanks, Mark, thanks, Sarah, thanks, Michelle, thanks, Joe, thanks, Chris, for joining us and helping to open the conversations up, even about the tricky issues.
It's been fantastic. Really enjoyed it, and thanks to everyone. Thanks to Chris, Michelle, Sarah, Joe, and John as well, and Rachel and Sam here as well. It's been a really good session. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
was nice, Leslie. Thank you very much for chairing that. That's excellent. And I think clients are starting to come into the Maggie Centre a little bit. So you heard a little bit of noise in the background.
Yeah, that's fine, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's all right. That's good. Right.
I can't seem to send a message. I've tried to put the link on for my document, but I've put it on to everyone, and it's not. There's no send button.
Well, for anyone who's still in the chat, this is the bloopers section, basically. So where we say really unkind things.
Outtakes.
It is
Outtakes,
there,
right.
Sarah.
I think if you just tap enter, it should just
Return,
go in.
yeah.
Oh right, okay.
Nice to see. There's a lot of thank you messages in the sidebar. So that's
There it is. Sarah is in.
Oh, it's
I've
come
done
up.
it
Yeah,
now.
fantastic.
Some fantastic contributions in the chat about people's own reflections. So it was, I don't know whether we're able to save it, Rachel, and you could email it to me or something. Is that possible?
I think so. I've saved it, so I will hopefully be able to email that over to you.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm going to leave the chat now, but it was a pleasure.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Maggie.
Everyone. Yeah.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye. See you tomorrow, Sarah.
Yes.
See you tomorrow, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye.